Hello everybody, welcome back. In this video, we are going to build a very interesting game called the knife game. We will do this over two videos, so this is the part one. Now this game is very interesting. One, it's extremely exciting to play, and two, it teaches us a great deal about Scratch programming because in building this game, we are going to use cloning, broadcasting, put in a very interesting programming logic, and also we will see how we will use costumes to get the effects that we want. So let's get started. Let's look at how this game plays. Basically, this game itself is very simple. We have a log. When I click this knife, the log starts to go around, but with a fixed knife on it. So notice there's this knife on this. Now I have to throw knives onto this log, and I do this by clicking my mouse. I get to throw 10 knives on this. So this time when I threw 10 knives, I go to level 2, and this time notice I get two fixed knives on the log, right? So once again, I can start throwing these knives, but I have to be careful not to hit either one of the throwing knives or a fixed knife. I hit it twice, that's why my life is only one. So I have still one more life to go, and I must, so I cleared this level. I threw 10 knives. This time I got 3 knives, right? So the game keeps going like this. The moment my lives become 0, the game stops, right? So it's a nice little game. So my lives became 0, game stopped, right? Now, in building this game, the first thing I want you to notice is that there are 3 sprites in this, which is basically the log sprite, this throwing knife, and the fixed knife, right? So this is the black one is what I call the fixed knife. This is a log, and this is what I call the throwing knife. Now, all these other copies that we are creating, this is for the throwing knife, but later on, as you have seen in level 2, we'll create copies of the fixed knife. For example, now I got 2 fixed knives, but these are really just clones, right? So we'll start this this development by first building these sprites. Right now, the reason we need to build these sprites is because these are not natively or naturally available in Scratch. So I cannot just say choose a sprite and bring these in. However, if you want, you can certainly upload these sprites. So you can, if you have some images from the internet that you think is nice for the knife or for these logs, you can surely use that. In my game, however, I'll use paint a sprite because I also want to show you how I got this kind of effect. Let's say I painted and I use a reshape tool to get, let's say, this distortions, right? In fact, we'll use that in creating the knife as well, right? So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is to say bye-bye to my cat sprite. This is a fresh project, by the way. So I said bye-bye to my cat sprite. I'm going to say paint a backdrop. And for the backdrop, I'll just use a normal, like a rectangle, right? And I just fill the entire stage with that. Right now, again, this is just to make it look a bit beautiful. You can do more elaborate backdrops as well. However, this is just fine for now, right? So I got a nice looking backdrop here. Now I'm going to say I will paint a sprite. So I'm going to start with a log sprite. Now the way I do the log sprite is that I will draw circles, right? So I'll basically draw 3 circles, and then I'll use the reshape tool, right? So I will draw a circle which is rather dark in color. So I'll make it, let's say, a brightness of about, say, 18 is fine. We'll increase the saturation a little bit. So, again, these specific exact numbers don't matter, but the idea is to make this quite dark, sort of a dark color here. Let's say something like this. And now to draw a circle, I will choose the circle tool, hold down the shift and draw a circle which I can then center this, right? So I'll center this onto the center of the canvas, right? Next, I will draw one more circle, but this time I'll make it a little bit brighter, right? So I will go to the fill and I'll make, let's say, brightness about 38 or 39 is fine, right? And I'll again hold down the shift and draw one more circle which is bigger than the first one, right? But notice that when I draw the second circle, the first one is completely covered by that, right? So to avoid that, what I'll do is that I'll select this outer circle and I'll click on this thing which is called back, which will send this backwards, right? So which means I'll get to see both the circles. Next, I will take one more circle, but this time I'll again change the color a little bit. So let's say I'll do maybe a little bit lighter shade of brown. So let's say this is kind of okay. Again, the specific exact color doesn't matter, but I will draw one more circle, which is, let's say, something like this, right? And again, I'll set it to back. Maybe I can make this a little bit bigger, right? So I will do that, and I've drawn this circle, right? Now, so I've got 3 circles here. This looks rather humongous. We are going to fix this. But before that, I'm going to do a little bit of reshaping on this so that this looks like it has come from a real tree, right? And the way I do that is I take this point reshape tool, which is this tool here, and I select each one of these to just sort of distort this a little bit, right? Again, there's no fixed rule on this. You can do what you like here. In fact, the more time you spend on this, the better it will look. But the whole idea is that make it look like it's as though it's come from a real tree. So I'll do, let's say, something like this, right? And then I'll take the outer one as well, and I will in fact do a little bit of gimmicks here. Let's say something like this, right? So anything, I mean, this one, the more time you spend, the better it's going to get. But the idea is just to make it a little bit fancy. And also we are seeing how this reshape tool really works, right? And how we can use it to create, let's say, some interesting ideas here, right? So something like this is fine. Yeah. Now maybe I'll make this a little bit roundish here, right? But this is okay. Yeah. So now the next question that comes up is that how large should this log be, right? Now notice that in our game here, we have this log in the middle, but we also have enough room for the knife to be thrown, and then these knives to go around the log, right? So sort of go around along with the log. So which means that what I can do, a rule of thumb, is that I can make this log about 25% of my stage height, right? So this is just a guideline. It's not like a fixed thing. So if I, let's say, make it about 40, I think this kind of looks just about nice. So log has become about, say, 25% or 1/4 of the stage height, right? Now, before I move further, I'm going to do a very, very important step, which is that I'm going to place this log at, say, 0, 0, right? Now, the importance of this will become clear as we go on, but I'll also rename this as log, right? So I've created my log sprite. I'll now proceed ahead and build the knife sprites. Now, once again, for the knife sprite, I am going to say paint a sprite, right? So I paint a sprite and I'll call this fixed knife, right? So I'll just call this fixed knife. And to do this, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to, use my rectangle tool, get a dark color in place. So I'll use the rectangle tool to build a rectangle. And now I will use a circle tool, but this time I will try to get, let's say, a kind of like a grayish color, right? So again, this exact color doesn't matter, but slightly grayish color. So with a lower saturation, I'll get this and I'll remove the outline, right? So I'll do this. And now I will draw an ellipse around this, which looks, say, something like this. And I'll connect it to my knife here, right? Now, clearly this doesn't look anywhere like a knife. However, we can use the reshape tool to get the effect that we want, right? And how do I do that? Well, I go and select this tool. Now I'll just go and distort this thing a little bit to make it look like a knife, right? Now, again, this is one of those things where you spend more time, the better it's going to look. But for our purpose, I think something like this is, maybe I'll just make it a little bit sharper. It kind of looks okay, right? So I'll just make it a little bit sharper and maybe a little bit narrower as well. So this became something like this. Yeah, something like this is just fine, right? Like I said, the more time you spend on this, the better, more beautiful it's going to look, right? And in fact, some people do a really nice job here, but this is just fine for our purpose, right? So we have used the reshape tool to get what approximately looks like a knife, right? I think it's good enough for now. Now comes a very, very important step, which is that how do we size this and how do we position this, right? Now, this is actually very, very, very interesting. I told you in the beginning that we are going to use costumes in a very smart manner in this game, and we'll see this now, right? So first thing first, how large should this be? Well, this looks very large because remember, this knife and log should be in proportion. This knife looks very, very large compared to the log. So I can probably make it, let's say, about 50%, which looks just nice. So that is just step number one. Now comes the very important step. So what I want to do is that I'm going to move my knife away so that it looks like it's embedded in the log, right? Now, how do I do that? Well, remember, first thing first, that the log was at 0, 0. So I will move my knife also to 0, 0, right? So which means knife and log are both in the same position. Now I'm going to select my knife and I'm going to move this down until it looks like it's just about embedded in the log, right? So if I did this, let's say I put it somewhere here, then it looks like the knife is nicely embedded in the log, right? Now, why did I do this? Now, this is really to do with the way on how we are going to make these sprites move later on, right? Remember, in the game when we build it, the knife, the log just keeps going around and the knife is attached to the log and it goes around in the same way, right? Now this turning happens using the turning block, right? So we are going to say turn certain degrees, certain number of degrees to create this effect. But the interesting bit is, and I can show you from this code, is that though the log is going around in center, but when it comes to the knife, right, when it comes to this fixed knife, it's really moving around the center of the log, right? So if I put my mouse pointer here, you can clearly see that it's moving around the center of the log, right? And in fact, I can see this by making my log invisible, in which case you notice that this guy is really going around the center of the log, right? Now to make sure that this actually works, I have displaced this costume. So when I use the turning block on this, it's going to go around this point. It's going to go around in a big circle around this point, which is also the center of the log, right? So this, I think, is a very smart move, because using this, we have, we will create the effect of knife moving along with the log without using any mathematical formulas, right? So we'll just use costumes to get this done. The other method would have been to use some somewhat advanced mathematics to have this effect, right? So here we have just played around a bit with costumes to get what we wanted, right? This is what I said, that this game brings in some very smart usage of costumes as well. Next, I'm going to say duplicate this costume, right? And instead of calling fixed knife 2, I'll call it a throwing knife. I'll call this a throwing knife, and just to distinguish the two, I'm going to, without changing its position, so that part is important, I'm not going to change its position. I'm going to just change the fill of these things, right? So that, for example, here, if I make the brightness, let's say 100, then it becomes red, and even this color I can change a little bit, right? So I'll make the brightness something like this. Right now, again, this is really the more time you spend on this, the better this is going to look, but this is fine for now, right? And the important bit is that we have moved both the fixed knife and the throwing knife away in a way that when they are at the same location of X and Y, it looks like the fixed knife is just somewhat embedded in the log, right? So now with this all done, we can start the coding. Now we'll start the coding with the log, right? Now first thing first, I'll go to the log. I'll start coding with the log, because the log code is actually quite easy. All I want is that I want to send the log to a certain point in the stage, and then it just keeps rotating. Before I go there, however, I will want to make sure that my log is on the front layer, right? So I will do this in multiple times just to be sure. What do I mean by that? It should be on the front layer, because notice right now the knife is appearing on top of the log, right? We do not want that. We want the knife to be hiding behind it. So when the knife and the log overlap, it's a log that we should be seeing, because we want the knife to appear as though it's just nicely embedded in the log, right? To do this, very simple. We are going to go to the log and going to say, look, go to front layer. Now the moment I do that, basically log comes front, and since these two are overlapping, log is on a front layer, hence log hides the view of the knife, and it looks much more pleasing to us. I mean, looks a lot more convincing, right? Now once having done this, so what I will do is that I will say when flag clicked, right, I will send my knife slightly high up here. So I'll say maybe go to, let's say something like go to x of 0, say y of 50. Right now, again, 50 is just a number. It's fine. I mean, it need not be exactly 50. It can be 60. That's okay. But thereafter, I'm going to say forever turn right by, say, 3 degrees, right? Now, this is very much like what we have done for a color wheel. I'm going to use the turning block. So turn clockwise, say, by about 3 degrees. Now, why did I choose 3? Because I think it's just a little bit nice. It's not too fast, not too slow. It looks nice, right? So now the log is turning. We have just placed it on x50. Now, like I said, 50 is just a number. You could put a 60, 65, whatever is okay. But make sure there's sufficient room for the knife to go around, right? And also this knife to be thrown upwards. So with this, the coding for the log is actually done. Now we are going to proceed on with the coding for the fixed knife and also the coding for the throwing knife in the second part. But before I go there, right, I just want to spend some time thinking about what happens in this game from a code point of view, right? So let's just think about what all do we need to do, because once we have that big picture in mind, then the coding becomes that much more logical. We'll understand that much better what is it that we're trying to do, right? So if I look at the code for this, right, so if I think of this code, like I said, there's a fixed knife and there is also a throwing knife, right? So we have built these costumes. Now let's just for the moment think about the fixed knife, right? So we know that the fixed knife appears along with the log, and it also keeps moving with the log, right? So notice the moment the game starts, there's already a fixed knife in there. and it moves along with the log, right? Now, in every level, we get a different number of fixed knives. For example, in level 1, we get one knife, level 2, we get two knives, and so on, right? So, which means that there is, uh, you know, uh, this kind of coming with the log, right? So, every time a level changes, we get a new number of fixed knives, right? So, that's for the fixed knife. For the throwing knife, we have seen that it appears at the bottom of the screen, it gets thrown upward to the log, and on reaching the log, it also gets embedded to the log, and then it also moves along with the log, right? So, as far as the movement of these logs, these knives are concerned, they are very similar. They both go around along with the log, and the costume is going to be playing a vital role over there. However, their cloning and their, let's say, the way they appear is different, right? So we are going to use cloning for both of these. Now, let's just take a little bit of a look at what happens at the for the different timelines, right? So you remember, when the game first starts, we create a log and one clone of the fixed knife. Now then I keep playing, so I keep hitting the throwing knives. Maybe I get, so once I get to say 10 of these throwing knives, then I can delete the previous clone that I had created and create two new fixed knives, right? Next, I'll play the next level again. Once it comes to this level, I'll delete these two, and I'll then create three clones, right? So this is the method I'm going to follow. So first I'll create one, I'll delete that, then I'll create two, I'll delete those two when I go to the third level, then I'll create three, I'll delete these three when I go to the fourth level, and so on and so forth, right? Now, you might wonder, why is it that I'm doing it this way? Why don't I say I create one clone here, then I create one more clone here, then I create one more clone here, and so on, right? Now, the answer to that question is yes, you can do that, but it turns out that coding wise, this is actually easier, right? To do that, you have to use variables for a specific sprite only. We will learn that in a little bit later time. But for now, we are going to use this method where I create a sprite, create a clone. When the level changes, I delete that and I create two new. I delete these two, I create three. I delete these three, I create four, and so on and so forth, right? So this is what I'm going to do for the fixed knife. For the throwing knife, right? For the throwing knife, I'm going to do something very similar. However, remember, the throwing knives are something that I throw. So I get, let's say, when the level starts, I get one. I throw 10 of these, and then I go to level 2, right? At this point, I need to delete all these 10 from the log, right? So which means that for the throwing knives, indeed, there's no other way but that I have to delete these clones. Then I have to create 10 more, delete them, and then the game proceeds, right? So basically, the game proceeds level to level. So we start with level 1, then we go to level 2, level 3. Every time the level changes, we delete all the existing clones, whether they are of the fixed knife or they are of the throwing knife. Then we create, let's say, if it's level 2, we create two new clones for the fixed knife. And then the user creates by throwing his, by using his mouse, he creates more and more clones of the throwing knife, right? And that's how the game proceeds. So this is an important one. I mean, we'll keep coming back to this timeline so that we understand what's going on. But to structure this code, we are going to use two broadcasts and this variable called level, right? So I'm going to say, okay, let's set this, let's say when the flag is clicked, I'll set this level to 1. And I will use two broadcasts, one for the fixed knives, one for the throwing knives, right? Now, you might wonder, why do I use two broadcasts? Why can't I just do with one broadcast? Actually, answer is you can, but I find that splitting them across two broadcasts makes my code clean and easier to understand, right? So this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to follow in the subsequent, let's say, going forward, right? So let's get started. Like I said, in this part of the video, we'll look at only the fixed knife. We'll see how the fixed knife gets created. We'll see how it gets, removed, let's say, per level, and how does the entire flow work, right? Now, let's go to the fixed knife. So I'll go to the fixed knife here, and I will say, for the fixed knife, I will basically say when the flag is clicked, right? So when flag is clicked, so I'm going to hide this thing. Because I really, like I said, I want to use cloning for this purpose. So every time what I'm seeing on the log is really, it's cloned, right? It's not the original sprite, but the clone of the sprite, right? So I'm going to say hide. So in this, I'm going to say hide. Also, just to be sure, just to make sure that this guy is actually on the back layer, I'm going to say go to back layer, right? So go to, let's say, back layer. Now this is may or may not be needed, so I'll just invert these two because we have already done go to front layer for the log, but there's no harm in just being sure about this, right? So once I do this, the clone is hidden. Basically the sprite is hidden. Now we're going to start cloning, but before that, like I said, I'm going to create a variable. So I'll create a variable called level, right? I'll just call it level. Let this be for all sprites, and I'm going to say when flag is clicked, right? So basically when flag is clicked, right? So this guy's sprite is hidden, but when the flag is clicked, I'm going to say set level to 1, right? So I set the level to 1, and now I will use my two broadcasts that I talked about. So I'll create two broadcast messages. First is, I'll say broadcast. Let's say, say new fix knives. Right now, what this means, this broadcast is supposed to do is that, okay, look, the level has changed, and now I must go and get new set of fixed knives. I'm going to delete the old knives, and I'm going to get a new set of fixed knives. So I'll say broadcast new fixed knives, and then I will also broadcast a message new throwing knives, right? So like I said, it's completely okay if you just do one broadcast here, but separating these two, helps us in understanding the code better, right? At least I think so. It structures the code quite nicely. So I'll broadcast these two messages, but then again, broadcast is never complete unless I tell what happens when I receive this broadcast, right? So when I receive this broadcast, right, remember, this broadcast will be given to me every time the level changes, right? So now starting of the game is also like a level changing. So in some sense, level from 0 is going to level being 1, right? So what I'm going to do is that when I get, let's say, when I get, this new fixed knives message. So remember, what do I have to do here, right? So when I get this message, new fixed knives. So let's go back to our timeline a little bit. For the fixed knives, say perhaps I'm going from level 2 to level 3. So what I have to do is that I have to first delete these two clones, and then I have to create 3 new clones. When I'm going from level 3 to level 4, which means level is 4, then I'll first delete these 3 clones that existed before this level started, and I'm going to create 4 new clones, right? So in other words, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to first delete all the existing clones, and then I will make sure that I will create new clones, right? And in fact, I'll create exactly the same clones as the level, right? So in level 1, I'll create 1 clone. In level 2, I'll create 2 clones. Level 3, 3 clones, and so on and so forth, right? So what I'm going to do is to use another broadcast here. So I'll say broadcast, say a message here, and let's just call it, we'll call it, let's say, remove old knives. Let's say, let's to be clear, let's say remove old fixed knives, right? So the purpose of this broadcast is that I want to make sure that all the existing sprites, all the existing clones first disappear. So what I will do is that instead of this broadcast, in fact, I will use broadcast and wait, and I'll tell you about the reason for this in just a moment. But what I will do is that I'll say when I receive remove old fixed knives, I will just say delete this clone. Right now there's no clone, but as you can imagine, what's going to happen is that when I get this new fixed knives, which means the level has changed, I will broadcast this message, remove all fixed knives and wait, which means this part of the code will get done before anything else happens here, right? Now, why do I do all this, right? This is just to make sure that all the old knives have been removed, have been deleted before I start putting together a new set of knives, right? So I was actually doing this game without being so careful, but I found that was not very consistent. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it did not work. That's why I'm going that extra mile of carefulness, let's say extra mile of caution, where I'm going to first make sure that these clones are removed. That's why I say broadcast and wait. Remove this, broadcast this message. This will delete all the existing clones, right? This broadcast is getting mixed with cloning, which means all the clones are going to receive this broadcast message and they will get deleted. Now, once this has happened, I can just use a repeat loop to create a new set of clones, right? So all I have to do is to say repeat, let's say, in the variables, I'll say repeat level, and I'll create create level clones myself. So why do I do this? Because remember, level, if level is 1, then I create 1 clone. If level is 2, then I create 2 clones, and so on and so forth, right? So I'll just say create a clone of myself, and in here I'll go and say, let's say, just to add a little bit of weight between these 2 clones. So probably I'll put, say, a little bit of a weight, say 0.2 seconds, right? Now, with this, what's going to happen is that my clone creation and deletion has been taken care, because whenever I receive new fixed knives, which will happen every time I cross a level, we'll see that later on. But the philosophy I've already shown you. So whenever I receive the new fixed knives, I'm first going to remove all the existing knives, and then I'm going to create a new set of knives, right? And how many knives I create is just the level, right? So this part is quite simple, but quite logical. But now I need to tell what happens when these clones are created, because these clones, these cloning is not complete basically until I tell what the clones do when they are created. Right now, just before I move on, I just want you to realize that this part is quite similar to what we did in the Chrome Dino, where we had this repeat loop and then we had these clones getting created. Right, so this is quite something we are quite familiar with. Right now, what happens when I start as a clone, right? So I'll just put a code here, go to control when I start as a clone, right? Which means we are talking about the fixed knife. Now remember what happens really to it, right? The fixed knife has to go to the log, right? So fixed knife really has to go to the log. What I will do is that I will first thing first, I must show it, because remember the sprite itself was hidden. So when I start as a clone, I will show. Now I will make it go around the log. So basically what I will do is that I will first thing first, I'll say point in direction 90. Right now, why do I do that? Well, because I want it to start in a say in a known position, right? So I'll say point in direction 90, which means be upright. So you can use the arrow to tell you point in direction 90 is pointing upwards. So I say point in direction 90 because I want this to start upright. Now comes a very important point that I must send it to the same position as the log. Right now, this part is very, very, very important because I want this guy to go along with move along with the log, right? So what will happen is that if I just did this much, right? The moment I create this, notice I get a knife which has gone to the same position as the log, and the reason it's looking embedded in the log is because remember the costume has been adjusted to basically be a little bit offset from the log, and hence it looks that it's just embedded, right, and standing upright. Now we will play a little bit of a trick that we'll say forever, right? Basically I'll use a forever block. So forever, say turn in a clockwise direction by 3 degrees, right? So I'll say turn in a clockwise direction by 3 degrees. Now why do I choose 3 degrees? Because that is what I had done for the log, right? So when I do this, notice what will happen is amazingly the knife will look like it's going along with the tree, right? So now it's just going along with the tree, and it's going along with the log, and it's looking really nice. The reason it's happening this way is because remember, as I told you in the beginning, we have played some tricks with the costumes. The costume of the knife is offset from the center, which means when a knife was at 0, log was also at 0, it was just it looked like embedded. And now that both are at 050 and both are going around, it looks like knife is going around the log, right? As I told you, it's quite smart trick to have been done. Now there's only one more thing to be done, which is that when I start this game, every time the knife seems to be starting from here. How do I make sure that it looks a little bit more random? Well, all I need to do really is that I can go and say point in direction 90. That's just a starting point. Go to this point, and there I can use the turning block once again along with a random number, right? So what I'll do is that turn, let's say anywhere from 0 to say 1 to 359 degrees. Now how did I get this 1 to 359? Well, for those of you who know about angles and circles, you know that going around a circle is like 360 degrees. If you do not know this, that's okay, because what this will do is that it will make sure that your knife, if I start the game every time, notice sometimes knife appears from here, sometimes it appears from somewhere else, and so on. That's because the knife is actually coming in here. Before we realize, it just randomly gets turned for a certain amount, and then it starts from wherever, right? Now this part is actually important, because if we did not do this, right, when we later on in the next levels, when we create more knives, we want to make sure that they all appear from random places. If we do not do this, then they'll all appear from the same point. It will look very odd. They'll actually be kind of on top of each other, right? So just to avoid that, we are saying turn, take a random turn, and then pretty much you are done, right? So with this, we are done for the code for now for the fixed knife. Like I said, in the next part of the video, we are going to continue with what happens for the throwing knife. And I hope you found this useful. Take care. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.